Crazy to think, and wow, do I feel old thinking of it. 21 years ago, Crucified Mortals, Converted by Decapitation, was released August 13th, 2004. And we're going to talk about that and celebrate its anniversary. So let's jump back to those years, which would have been around 2003 when we started recording it. A young Reaper. I think I was, well, I know I was, well, actually, I don't, because I got to think about it a second. My birthday's in October, so at the end of 2003, I would have been 17. So, 17-year-old Reaper is somehow putting together this band that really, like, we didn't have a label or something, so it was very much a release that we were kind of scheduling and pushing ourselves to do, financing it all. And through my experience, definitely not at the time, I wouldn't to hell or high water, it didn't even think to like that it, like, when we got going, like, we're gonna do this. But like, through my experience now through the years, like, the fact that we did do it always kind of amazed me, because there's so many things that could have made it not happen, much like what did happen later on that actually lengthened the process, and that was running out of money. My Denny's cook pay didn't cut it for a while. But as we got it going, so rewinding a little bit, at that point, I started Crucified Mortals in 2001. And as a solo band, just with me with a drum machine and stuff, mostly with the intention that it's like, I don't have any friends right now that are in the metal or really at all. I grew up in like rural Medina, Ohio, and so I'd like to think that's an excuse of why not. But either way, at least for the metal part, harder to meet like-minded individuals. So if you build it, they will come, said Kevin Costner's ghost in that movie. So I took that advice, and why was it right? And so started building, and had a few iterations of having some members and then doing other demos, because there is a demo that is just me hung out to die. I thought I was so clever, with ketchup on my stomach, hanging in a tree with one of the first digital cameras, and boy, was it bad. But the ambitions were there, and there was that kind of demo. There was a studio demo with another like drummer and guitar player. And then eventually at some point, Sebastian enters the mold. There was this place around Cleveland. Actually, I think it was a Canton, Ohio place, called Quonset Hut. Mostly, like, I guess the technical would be like a head shop, because you could get like bongs and crap, but like tapestry. So, and then they had like a metal section. I remember I bought like a copy of Venom Black Metal there, like the CD with the bonus tracks, and they had like the embossed slipcase cover. Nonetheless, I put an ad there looking for members, as you would back in those days. Probably could still do it now, but I don't know. I've never done it this way in the modern social media sense to find members. Anyway, that's how it happened. Put up an ad, and that's how Sebastian replied, because he's like almost double my age. So when somebody in their 30s, which is funny because I'm older than he was now. But at that point I was like 16. So as he always reminds me, we crack up about meeting each other to like, like, hey man, I like, cool, you fit the bill. You like Creator and German thrash, and no, I've never heard of Death Row. When I meet you, I would love to check out this Death Row, Sebastian. Fill me with your senior status. So anyway, so I couldn't like get a ride or something, because I lived down in Medina, which is about 30-40 minutes away from where he lived in the Cleveland area. And so it was like, hey man, well, like, I'm taking my driver's test next weekend. So like, if I pass, then my parents will let me use one of the cars. So then we can jam. And so it's pretty funny when you kind of remember. But the ambitions were there, so I love it. It's a great compliment to like look back at myself. I'm like, man, that fucker was like diehard. So And I remember I didn't pass that day. Damn maneuverability. And I got like the hard lady. Everybody like that was like the talk of school. Like, oh, if you get her, like she's a bitch about, you know, certain things. So I think I was more so like intimidated than I was like bad at it. So anyway, didn't pass the first time, so that like even having to come back like and be like, oh, I'm not gonna be able to practice because I didn't pass my driver's test. For anybody young right now, I'm not doing this to sway you. If you have that same ambition, there is zero shame of this. It's just funny looking back. So that was the Sebastian story, and luckily I passed that driver's test eventually. My dad let me use his car, and I drove the Sebastians, and then the rest is history. And so, you know, it seems like years, but it wasn't. But definitely by looking by the dates. So I'm not. Let's say just some time had passed. And then it's like we're demoing. We did like Reaper's Blade, Soul of Fire. And somehow we thought that was good enough. Like, let's just start putting our sights on the studio. Like, so it was in my mind anyway, which in hindsight, no fucking way, that like the most important ingredient we're going to need at this point is a bass player. Cause, you know, it'd be cool to have a second guitar player, but if not, you know, I'll just do it. And in my mind too, because at that point we had the Reaper's Blade demo, and then those other demos that like, well, I'll just play bass on it if we can't get that. But that was kind of what happened, is we found Zach Rose to play guitar, and Sebastian had a show at WRUW, which is a college radio station at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland. And so Zach was a student there, and he also had a show, and then through that's how they knew. He's like, hey, you know, I met a guy that, like, he has a radio show, and he plays, like, old school shit. Like, I think he would fit in. So the rest is history on that. But, you know, in my mind, it's, like, still, like, well, second guitar player, that's cool, but, like, bass, you know? So Behemoth came to town, and they were nowhere near the size they are now. And their bass player, who they have now, was not the bass player that they had then. So Polish band, Sebastian's Polish, and somehow I've noticed there's just always a connect with Polish and Sebastian. So naturally, then he comes back like best buddies with Behemoth. Talking about the show, and you know, hey, their bass player was awesome. Even a friend of mine was talking about, I was like, dude, you know, finger picking. He had this like thing taped to his thumb. Like, oh, he was awesome. You know, their very just notable thing about their bass player. Nothing meant of like the foresight of what eventually did happen. And so one day Sebastian's like, hey, I asked Novi to play bass on our record, and he said yes. And it's just like, in my mind, like, whoa, like, not kind of like what's on my mind now. Like, why the hell would he have ever said yes to like this I think I was only 16 at the time, when like before we entered the record, because whatever, Novi says yes. We fly his ass out to Cleveland from Poland, and then he stays at Sebastian's house for 2 weeks. And within those 2 weeks, dude, this is fucking nuts to kind of think of it this way, too. It's the only way to think of it, because it's what happened. Like, we didn't have everything even written. So, like, somehow we're going to, like, jam and, like, be good enough, write songs that are good enough to finish the record, and then go in there. And in a way, that's kind of what did happen. Because then I recall mostly me and Sebastian had already started everything other than the song Masked Murder. And Zach had already brought, and so, okay, and then Sentenced to Extermination, or Of Extermination, because it flip-flops, there's a few typos on the release itself. The lyrics, I think, say Sentence of Extermination. The back of the CD say Sentence to, and that's on the original Stigmatized Records release. More about that record label in a second. So Zach brought 2 songs to the table, but like particularly when we started jamming, Sentenced was the one. And so when Novi showed up, like we had Reaper's Blade, Sentenced, Converted by Decapitation without lyrics, and then Soul of Fire, and then Usurpation. And then we were going to do a cover of Desultory Into Eternity, which I feel like we spent the most time on that, and then we just cut it like, oh, this isn't going to happen. But then it did happen years later. We'll leave that as an Easter egg for this story if you know those years later when it did happen. Anyway, somehow then through that like 2-week session, Zach busted out writing Masked Murder. I feel like that, unless I fail to remember something, because it's slightly a blur through the drinking that we did, and we jammed a lot. I do remember that, but it's just like, I don't know. I just don't remember like going so smoothly where like it just felt like we needed more time. But nonetheless, we got it together, and it worked out to at least get into the studio. The studio, though, that was the original studio that we had gone into called JMC Recording. I'm either getting the Marshall amp JCM or JMC. Yeah, the Marshall amp's JCM. So JMC Recording in Medina, who had done the band Decrepit from Cleveland's demo. Another handful, definitely a handful of artists throughout the area, but not all. But as far as the metal references, Decrepit's the one that comes to mind. But then there were definitely others, and that was like in Medina. That was like near me. So, and we had done the Soul of Fire, and then the song that never got released to this day, Set the World Afire, I think, or On Fire. I don't know if it was a Pure Annihilator thing, and I just remember my vocals on it were crazy. There were no drums, and it had like a Terminator Judgment Day piece sound sample in it. So anyway, that was kind of through that experience, like brought us back. Or at least like, hey, when we need to book a studio, like, hey, I'm going to book that. And then when we're ready to go, like he calls up and the JMC Recording guy, and he's like, look, business is bad. I'm closing down. And it's just like, we got a guy from Poland. Like, how the hell we're supposed to be there? Like, so in the last minute, Sebastian and Novi get in the car and they start scouting studios, or at least that's what it sounded like. And then they wound up finding Magnetic North Studio. Good old Chris Keffer, who became really our go-to engineer for all the Crucified Mortals stuff, to either from the bottom up, or through just the years of at least having his fingers on something. So anyway, luckily Chris saves the day, could fit us in his busy schedule, and we started recording. And we really needed him, and we really needed the technology at the time, because time was not of the essence. We ran out of time, at least with Novi. So to have it on bass, like there was this thing that it seemed crazy to me then, but like all the more of like, well, I've done records like this where it's like, well, if he's got to go back to Poland, like, and we're not done with the initial tracking, particularly like just drums, like we could send the files and he could do it at a studio and stuff. And I'm just thinking, oh man, like we're just going to waste money. Like this is never going to happen. Like he's not going to go back to Poland and finish this. Like he's going to forget about this release or what. I don't know. I remember kind of thinking, yeah, a little bit pessimistically, which I mean that I can kind of do that easily anyway. Nonetheless, we did get enough done to where then all priorities landed on like just getting Novi to a point where he can put his stuff down. And so that meant get the drums mostly done, and then he could put his performance on. And that's exactly what happened. We luckily got the drums done, and Novi knocked out his bass. And then he went back to Poland, and at that point we basically ran out of money. So I was working at Denny's at the time. I was in high school. This would have been the end of 2003. So my birthday's in October, so I would have been 17 at this point. financing a record that cost a couple grand, and we did it. Because then months later, we went into the studio to finish things off. I guess more notably, I did at that point, because then it was lyrics, not lyrics, vocals, and then mixing. And so that was definitely around the springtime. It was warmer. There's pictures, I have shorts and stuff, and then there's even video footage, because then years later, there was a reissue of Converted by Decapitation that came out of Digipack from Weird Truth Productions in Japan, and then it had, like, I made this video called, it was just a recording of, so that was like a bonus CD-ROM when that was a thing, on that disc. Where, hell, I guess at this point I could find the better, because it was like shit quality. Like, it had to be compressed down to fit on a CD-ROM. So I could, like, the full like DV camera, digital video, that it would have been shot on, could be definitely even better quality than that, because then, you know, we live in a world of 4K or 8K or what, Ultra HD, whatever the fuck. So I could upload it to YouTube. So let that be known in the comments if that's something you want me to do. Otherwise, go buy that damn disc. Because then, let's go back to then these, like, because that was the reissue, Weird Truth Productions. And I mentioned that before, through the years, and in a more recent video, Weird Truth Productions, in my story about going to Japan. So anyway, kind of skipping back over that and rewinding to then the initial release was Stigmatized Records. And that was going to be a label that Sebastian was going to run, because he wanted to put out a label, license a lot of Polish artists and stuff. So that was kind of the intention there. Like, all right, well, then I'll, you know, get my hands wet with this label thing with the CM release. And I think it's just kind of was naturally through, like, having my brothers with Hell's Headbangers and stuff, and then asking for a lot of, you know, advice on, like, you know, it's an underground release, like, we're doing it. So, like, you know, doing the underground stuff, like trading and you know, things that we do with record labels in the underground that are a little bit more catered to that kind of way of running a record label than the big wigs way. So that was going to kind of also, like, break us into some, you know, we're an unheard of band, and we hadn't even played a show at that point. So all the more to, like, know, like, why the hell would Novi want to be a part of this? So surprisingly so on that. And